Of all the tragic stories of Chernobyl, few are as infamous as that of the Bridge of Death. Countless rumours have circulated on film, online, and in print of the fate of the citizens of Pripyat, who heard of the explosion at Chernobyl Unit 4 and rushed down to see it from the bridge over the Chernihiv Ovruch railway, which connected to the Yaniv Station servicing Pripyat. Of those who went up onto the bridge that night, the rumours say, none of them survived, but the real story is both very different and equally dark. This is the untold story of the Bridge of Death. First, to dispel rumours, the Bridge of Death was not a death trap in terms of radiation. The easiest way to prove this is to look at the radiation on the date of April 26th, and by a miracle, we have these values. To find them, we need to look at part of the tragic story of Seraphim Vorobyov, the chief of the Civil Defense Staff, whose warnings of high radiation levels fell on deaf ears in the bunker on the night of the disaster, and who was even partially ignored by the government commission that evening. As the sun was rising, Vorobyov and his colleague Vasily Solovyev left the site to record the measurements around Pripyat. This is what he later told Yuri Sherbak about these events. People stood in front of the bridge, close to the border of the Red Forest. I then understood completely and irrevocably that it was pointless and impossible to hide the accident. I told the people, there is a major radiation accident at the nuclear power plant. We must leave here immediately. We drove onto the bridge. The device shows only 300 milliroentgens per hour. No more, no less. We drove up to the city. The indicators do not change either for me or for Solovyev. We measured with 2 instruments. Then we realized that the car was already contaminated. I realized that my clothes were also contaminated. This information gives us an upper bound for the radiation level at the Bridge of Death immediately following the accident. 300 milliroentgens per hour. This is equal to approximately 265 millirem per hour, or about equal to the expected dose the average human will receive in about 6 months, every hour. A lot of radiation, yes, but not enough to even increase your risk of developing cancer unless you stood on the bridge for 200 hours, or more than 8 days. Of course, some of you may not believe me about this claim, so let's do some research to find anyone on the internet who claims they stood on the Bridge of Death, or someone they know stood on the Bridge of Death that night and died. I could only find 2 claims, not including the people mentioned by Vorobyov, who were merely passers-by the morning after and trying to find a bus to Kiev, not knowing they'd all been cancelled due to the accident. The first relates to 62-year-old Pasha Kondratyev, who claims in an article by The Guardian that he and his family, including 2 daughters aged 10 and 12, went to the Bridge of Death and saw the smoking remains of the nuclear power plant. Of the family of 4, the eldest daughter would develop asthma in 1988 and would die aged 19 due to an asthma attack, which Pasha claims may be due to the Chernobyl radiation. Now, there are a few problems with this. Firstly, 3 of the 4 people who are claimed to have gone to the bridge survived, and the 4th death cannot be definitively proven as due to the Chernobyl radiation, let alone to radiation specifically standing on the bridge. Secondly, they claim to have seen smoke emanating from the reactor. The problem with this is that the reactor would not begin to eject large amounts of smoke until much later in the morning of the accident, about 9 AM, as testified by Alexei Breus, one of the people who worked in the Unit 4 control room the morning after the accident. And finally, the description of the bridge creates huge problems for the journalist for The Guardian, who may have not done their research fully. The description Pasha uses for the bridge is the bridge over the river subsidiary feeding the nuclear plant's cooling pond, which is the complete opposite of the Bridge of Death. Possibly he is referring to a bridge by the Yaniv backwater or on Lake Azmuchin, or perhaps the literal railroad bridge over the Pripyat River, all of which would offer much better views than the Bridge of Death. But it is for certain that the bridge Pasha describes and the bridge we are focusing on are two separate places. The only other example of someone claiming to have been on the Bridge of Death comes from Adam Higginbotham, who says that someone he interviewed was 7 years old at the time of the explosion and cycled over the Bridge of Death that night to get a better look. He's still alive, so the Bridge of Death myth seems pretty much debunked. But the name exists, and you may have remembered me earlier saying the Bridge of Death was not a death trap in terms of radiation. I specifically chose those words because the Bridge of Death was indeed a death trap, just not by radiation. For this, we need to start talking about architecture. As many of you may have noticed, the bridge is very steep on either side of the road, both in and out of Pripyat. While this gives us the opportunity for incredible photos looking down on the entrance of Pripyat before the accident, it also makes it impossible to see vehicles on the other side of the bridge. It was so steep, in fact, that some vehicles could become airborne driving over the bridge, including military vehicles on April 26th. Architecturally speaking, the Bridge of Death was a very poorly designed structure. Alexander Rabinsky, a former resident of the city of Pripyat, elaborated on this. They inflated the story. In fact, on the night of the accident, few people went out into the street. It was night outside, almost 2 hours after midnight. In the morning, someone then ran out, including me. But we didn't manage to stay on the bridge for long. The police immediately drove us away. After that, no one died, but the guys had health problems. It's not a fact that it was because of the bridge. In fact, the bridge was given its name even before the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The thing is that it was an unfortunate section of the roadway. Accidents often happened here. Once 2 motorcyclists crashed on the bridge. Since then, people have nicknamed this place Bridge of Death. So, to summarise, the bridge earned its name by being a lethal stretch of road in the local area, the same way some roads are nicknamed Mad Mile, for example. It just so happened that this one found itself close to a nuclear disaster. Even after the accident, vehicular mayhem continued. According to Napromieniowani, which I probably didn't pronounce correctly, a Polish group covering Chernobyl news and media, as well as previously offering tours to the Chernobyl exclusion zone. After the accident, 2 stalkers entered Pripyat to salvage materials they could sell for profit. Unfortunately for them, they did not notice the military truck that was speeding over the bridge, and the driver did not see them due to how steep the bridge is. A grisly fate, and totaling more victims for the Bridge of Death. An untold story, obscured by dark fantasies.